Correct. Good evening and namaskar to everyone. I am Shantan, representing Voices from the Periphery, and it is both a profound privilege and a heartfelt honor to welcome you all to today's lecture, Poetry, Puns, and Other Pleasures. This evening holds special significance as we are joined by one of the most eminent voices in the field, Professor Ruth Vanita. Professor Vanita is a renowned scholar, novelist, poet, and translator whose work has left an indelible mark on gender studies, queer theory, and South Asian literary and cultural history. Educated entirely in India, she taught for many years at Delhi University before moving on to the University of Montana, where she continues to teach and research. Her scholarship reflects a deep and sustained engagement with questions of justice, desire, and representation across literary traditions. Among her acclaimed nonfiction works are Shakespeare's Three Visions of History, The Dharma of Justice in the Sanskrit Epics, On the Edge 100 Years of Hindi Fiction on Same Sex Desire, and the pioneering Love's Rite Same Sex Marriages in Modern India. She has also authored Gender, Sex, and the City, Urdu Rekhti Poetry, 1780 to 1870, and Dancing with the Nation, Courtesans in Bombay Cinema, both of which are offered incisive cultural critiques. In addition to her academic contributions, Professor Vanita is an accomplished creative writer. Her novels, Memory of Light and A Slight Angle, both published by Penguin, explore themes of queer love, memory, and identity with poetic elegance. She has also published two poetry collections and remains an active literary presence. Her translations from Hindi to English, particularly of Mahadevi Verma's My Family and the forthcoming Portraits from Memory, further reflect her commitment to bridging linguistic and cultural worlds. Notably, she co-edited the groundbreaking anthology Same-Sex Love in India, a foundational text in the recovery of queer histories in the subcontinent. Across her diverse body of work, scholarly, literary, and translational, Professor Ruth Vanita continues to illuminate marginalized voices, challenge normative narratives, and open new pathways for thinking about love, language, and justice. We are truly honored to have her with us today. Over to you, ma'am.
Thanks very much for the introduction and thanks for inviting me. Special thanks to Pallab for organizing the whole thing. Today I'm going to talk about the process of translation, and this is largely based on my experiences of translating poetry and prose. So to begin with, of course, as we know, a poem transmits emotions. And emotions are nothing new. Emotions like love, loss, grief, joy, these are the oldest emotions expressed in poetry, whether it's from Sappho to the Mahabharata and poetry today. So therefore, the power of a poem usually depends not on what it is saying, because what it is saying is usually nothing new. But the power depends on saying it how it is said in a new and memorable way. In other words, it's the use of language that makes a poem memorable, the way in which the poet uses language. Now, it is this power of language that cannot be fully translated, especially into a largely unrelated language. For example, it's easier to translate from French into English or Marathi to Hindi than to translate from Sanskrit to English or English to Hindi. To take an example, I have taught the Bhagavad Gita many times to American students, and I've realized that how the sound of the language itself, the rhythm and the words, convey an emotion that is not conveyed in an English translation. Take these lines. This is the profoundly moving moment when, after seeing Krishna's Vishwarupa, the universal form, Arjuna asked Krishna to return to his own form as the four-armed deity. Tasmat pranamya pranidhaya kayam prasadaye tvamahim isham idiyam piteva putrasya sakheva sakhyuhu priyaha priyayarasi deva sodham. Okay, so now here's one of the best translations by Graham Schweig. Therefore, bowing down, prostrating my body before you, I ask you, the worshipable Lord, to bestow your grace. As a father is to a son, as a friend to a friend, as a dearly loved one to a dearly beloved, be pleased to show your loving kindness, O divinity. Now, this is perhaps as close as you can get in English, but it has nothing like the power of the original. First, the original words have an emotional and cultural weight. For example, take the word pranama. That's not the same as prostration. Prasada is not at all the same as grace. Grace is a Christian abstract quality, it's an abstraction of something invisible. Whereas prasada, it has an abstract aspect, but it also has a very concrete human meaning, as we know, the prasad distributed after worship. Whether that prasad is fruit or flowers or water, it connects the devotee directly to the living deity who is present in the world, not to some abstract god in the heavens. Similarly, sakheva sakhyuhu. Now, this is as a friend to a friend. Now, in the original, both the friends are gendered males from sakha. But in English, you can only say a friend to a friend. You can't gender the word friend. If you say male friend to male friend, that's placing too much emphasis on the maleness. Whereas in the original, the maleness is just part of the word. Similarly, priya priyayarsi, a lover to one who loves to the one who is beloved. In the original, both of them are male. And you can't, this applies directly to Krishna and Arjun, so both are male. But in English, you can't gender these words lover, beloved, the one who loves, the one who is beloved. You can't. Similarly, Isham is translated here as Lord. It's not quite the same thing. Okay, or take this other extraordinary sentence from Macbeth. No, this my hand would rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. Now, you can translate the meaning into Hindi very easily, but the power of the sentence cannot be translated. Why? Because the effect of the sentence the verse depends on the hard hitting monosyllables in the last line. The green one red. Now, in Hindi, green is hara. You cannot turn it into one syllable. And there is no exact equivalent for multitudinous or incarnadine. So there's a contrast between that polysyllabic multitudinous incarnadine to the simple sort of hard hitting green one red. Now, you can translate the meaning of the lines, but you can't translate the poetry. The poetry is what is lost, as Robert Frost said, poetry is what gets lost in translation. Anyway, to go now into more detail, one still has to translate. Why does one have to translate? For those who cannot read the original. It's better to have Homer in translation or Kalidas in translation than no Homer or no Kalidas or no Tolstoy. So I taught myself to translate when I was working at Manushi. I co-founded it, and it was the first feminist nationwide magazine in India. And I volunteered on it from 78 to 91. So in it, I translated in every single issue from Hindi to English, both fiction, non-fiction, and some poetry. And for 8 years, we also brought out a Hindi version. So I was translating from English to Hindi as well. So this is where I learned. And so I was self-taught. I didn't have any translation classes or anything like that. These are some of the books that I have translated from Hindi to English. So as you can see, some major writers, some other writers as well. All right, so let's take some examples of translation from my historical novel, Memory of Light, published in 2020. It tells the story of love between two women who are both courtesans, the wife, and one is from Lucknow, one is from Kashi. And the narrator is Nafis, who is middle-aged, remembering her youth. So both of the women are highly educated and accomplished, as courtesans were at the time. They were not sex workers. They were female intellectuals and colleagues of male poets. They shared spaces and patrons with male poets. Now, Nafis and Chapla, my two courtesans, they are fictional characters. But in the novel, I also have some real-life characters who were actually lived. The historical poets like Insha, Allah Khan Insha, Saadat Yar Khan Rangeen, and Jurrat are three of the poets who are characters in this novel. And they are friends of Nafis and Chapla. They know about their relationship. They tease them about it and so on. So I quoted some of the poems by these poets in the novel. And let's take a ghazal from one of these poets. This is a serious love poem from one woman to another. Zanahi ke rangat hai jawan aur peer sone ki, sarapa wo nazar aati hai ek tasveer sone ki, kinari gird jo chehre ki uski zeb deti hai, musawwir jo kehti hai tasveer ki tahrir sone ki, gale ke haar tere ho rahi hu e ay lagga main, nahi darkar tujhko jaane man zanjeer sone ki. Now, if you look at the words in the original, you can see from the verbs that the speaker is feminine and the person she's addressing is also a woman. A woman is speaking to a woman. You don't have to put any title to know this. It's clear from the verbs. In English, when you translate, now my girlfriend has a youthful complexion like yellow gold because it's using the you and I form, and English doesn't gender the verbs or the pronoun, the first and second person pronoun. From head to foot, she looks like a picture of gold. So the person to whom the poem is addressed is a woman, but who is the speaker? In English, you can't, there's no way to show that the speaker is a woman. So I had to put a title, A Woman Speaking to a Woman. Otherwise, it's not clear. And the whole point of the, at least one of the main points of the poem is lost. So, despite the caption, when I had many poems in the book, most readers forget and they assume that the speaker is a male because we unconsciously, all of us do this, we unconsciously heterosexualize. But in the original, this is not possible because in every sentence, the verbs remind you that it's a woman speaking to a woman. We said this is one of the difficulties with translating. So here, for one more example, is a poem by Insha. In this, the poet refers to the two women as Chandani and Chapla, that is moonlight and lightning. And in the original, Chandani and Chapla, of course, in Hindi, are both gendered female. So again, you don't have to say that these are women, but in the translation, you do have to, if lightning and moonlight are not gendered at all. And so you say two fairies close together, that then I had to add Lady Moonlight has become Lady Lightning's sister to make it clear that they are two women. Okay, let's take another example of words, questions of terminology. So in 18th and 19th century Urdu and Hindi, it was the same language at the time. What we now call Urdu was called also Hindi at the time because it meant the language of Hind. Hind is India, the language of Hind, contrasted with Farsi, which is the language of Persia, but was also the language of the royal courts and educated men in India. So Hindi was the language of India, and that is what we now call Urdu. Now, there was a whole lexicon, that is, words in the dictionary, for male desire and female devire, as well as for the people who had felt these desires. For example, dogana, zanaki, ilaichi, chapti, chapatbaz for sex between women, etc. Now, all these words are there. Some of them are still in use. In UP, there are still rituals whereby women establish their intimacy. So these words, as you can see, women establish intimacy performing a ritual together. And then among their women friends, they were known as a couple, or as one poet writes, even they were known as married among their companions, female companions. Now, in the originals, the meaning of the word is clear. What is a dogana, what is an ilaichi becomes clear. Chapti means to stick or to cling. So when you say chapti and chapatbaz, the meaning is clear. But in English, how do you do this? It just sounds weird. If we say sticking together or something, it just doesn't work. So you use the original word, then the meaning is not clear. So this is one of the problems, right? Okay, so this is when translating from Hindi or Urdu into English. Now, the other way around, when I translated this novel, I wrote it in English and I translated it into Hindi as Pariyon Ke Beech, which was published by Rajkamal Prakashan the following year in 23. When I translated it, it was a very interesting process because one question was how to make the language of the 18th or 19th century comprehensible to modern speakers of Hindi and modern readers. I couldn't use modern Hindi diction. That would have been out of place at the time. I couldn't use high-flown Persianized Urdu because the modern reader won't understand it. And also because these women are unlikely to have spoken that kind of language at home. So I used in dialogue quite a few colloquial Awadhi words. Awadhi is a form of Hindi, and Lucknow was the capital of Awadh. The language of the city was strongly shaped by Awadhi. So that was fine. But it took a hit and miss process to get there. And of course, I used the original poems. That was great. I could use the original poems, and they're very simple poems. They're not high-flown Urdu poems. They're simple Urdu poems. I also found that some of the dialogue flowed much more easily in Hindi if I had written it in English originally. But some of my own descriptions, which are in my language, not the women speaking, that may have been stronger in English because I wrote it in English. But there's a Hindi critic called Jayaprakash Pandey, and he did a video review on YouTube of this novel, and he said that it reads as if it was written originally in Hindi, and that reassures me. So I'll give you an excerpt in English of the original and the translation, and you can see which you prefer. And this describes the two women's first kiss. Okay, so in the English version, As we looked down at the picture, our fingers touched, entwined, sent lightning coursing up my arm. Our hands opened, covered each other, closed, bone fierce against bone. A gust blew in from the gallery, set the little bells on the hookah tinkling, and the flame went out. In blessed darkness, we slid back on the divan against the wall. Her lips traveled up my arm. Moonlight showed me her face, mouth half open as if in agony. One instant suspended, then I grasped her face with both hands. Her gasp as our mouths met and held goes through me like a shock as I write. The moon sent in its silver grayness. We talked meaninglessly about the meaning of what we were doing, then fell back into kisses. Okay, I'll read now the Hindi. Tasveer par aankhein. You can see the PowerPoint, I hope. Hello? Can you
Yes,
see
ma'am.
the
Yes.
PowerPoint? Yeah, you can. Okay. तस्वीर पर आंखें टिकी थीं, उंगलियां छू गईं, गुथ गईं, मेरी बाह में बिजली दौड़ गई, हाथ खुले एक दूसरे को ढके बंद हुए, तेज पकड़ से हड्डी पर हड्डी रगड़ गई। गैलरी से हवा का झोंका आया, हुक्के की नन्ही घंटियां बज उठी, चिराग बुझ गया। खुशनुमे अंधेरे में दीवान पर ढलक गई हम, दीवार से सटक गई, उसके होंठ मेरे बाह पर विचरते कंधे तक पहुंचे। एक पल का अटकाव, फिर मैंने उसके मुख को दोनों हाथों से पकड़ लिया। होंठों के मिलते जकड़ते वक्त उसकी हाफी अभी भी ये लफ्ज लिखते हुए मुझे चटका जाती है। धुंधली चांदनी में हमने दो क्षण अपने किए हुए की बेमतलब सी बातें करी, फिर दोबारा चिमट गईं। Okay, let's take the title. So in Hindi, it is Pariyon ke Beech, which is a translation of Among Fairies. Now, Among Fairies was my initial title for the English novel, but it didn't work. Why not? Because the publisher said that Among Fairies sounds like a children's book. But in Hindi, Pari or fairy still can mean a beautiful person. Similarly, I had some difficulty with certain words, like for example, endearments, like Meri Jaan, my life. Okay, that works in translation. But others don't work as well. For instance, pyare or pyari. How do you translate that? Do you translate as darling or sweetie? My editor said that these words sound too modern. But if you say beloved or dear one, that doesn't convey the colloquial intimacy of pyare or pyari. So these are some of the problems. Overall, I've found a general statement about translation that the more colloquial the language is, the harder it is to translate. For example, it's much easier to translate Sanskritized Hindi or Persianized Urdu because you can use the Latinate English equivalents. And these two classical languages, Sanskrit and Persian, are closely related to Latin and Greek. So you can find Latinate. But when you have colloquial words in any language, they are immersed in local cultural reality. For example, a word like sindoor or suhag or jhutha, they carry a wealth of meaning that translations such as vermilion or leavings or married bliss, they don't communicate the meaning. So since Memory of Light is my own novel, I could take liberties and transcreate at times. But when I translate other fiction by other authors, I try to be as faithful as possible to the original. This is my most recent translation, On the Edge. It's a collection of 16 stories and extracts from novels and short stories. And here I had to work with a variety of styles, from Premchand to Gitanjali Shri, so it's over a long period of time, and Vijayadan Detha. Now, one interesting observation while translating this work, which many of the stories are about love, confirmed my sense that the phrase "I love you," which Hindi movies translate into Hindi, is in fact not at all prevalent in North Indian languages before the 20th century, or even today among monolingual Indian language speakers. So in my novel, In Memory of Light, no one uses this phrase. No one says, "I love you," to anyone else. I also, though it's a love story, I didn't use the word love anywhere in that novel. And interestingly, no reviewer noticed this fact. So I love you is, of course, near universal in English now, but not in North Indian literatures. In most Indian languages before the 20th century, if you read the literature, individuals never say I love you, either in literature or in real life. There are many, for example, in letters, people don't say that. There are many other sort of more subtle ways of conveying attachment. So let's take one example from this book as an example of the untranslatable. This is Asha Sahai's 1947 novel A Kakini. It was forgotten for a long time and only rediscovered recently. Now, how do you translate this title, A Kakini? Woman alone or a single woman? Single woman has a different meaning in English. Unmarried woman, it means. Now, these don't work because ekakini suggests singularity or uniqueness, something that is one of a kind. So I finally just decided to just keep the title ekakini and not translate it. Now, Sahai also uses the words like Shakti and Sadhana. Both are really untranslatable words. She uses several Indian motifs and narratives, Suhagin, Viyogan, etc., etc. It's a kind of what I would call an indigenous feminism, similar to that of Mahadevi Verma. Um, Mahadevi Verma's poem, she wrote a poem called Panth Hone Do Aparichit, Let the Path Be Unfamiliar. It was published in her 1942 collection Deepshikha, and it concludes with lines that use the word ekaki. And the sort of Upanishadic feeling in the word ekaki is I think that is where Asha Sahai's ekakini she may have got the word there. Now, this is from Mahadevi Verma's poem. Jaan lo wo milan ekaki vireh mein hai dukela. Know that solitary union is dual in separation. Vireh mein hai dukela. That word dukela is very interesting. That similar word came up again in this book, Mahadevi's book Mera Parivar. It was a less known book which I translated as My Family. It's the first time translation of this book in 22 by Penguin. This book is about Mahadevi's animal companions: a deer, a squirrel, peacocks, a rabbit, a cow, and dogs. Her preface to this book, she calls it Atmika, meaning about myself, but it's a lovely coinage. 12 years later, she used that word Atmika again as a title of a book of her own poems. This word combines the idea of the spiritual connected to the eternal self, the Atman, with the idea of the intimate interiority of the individual self, Atmik, and she feminizes both of them with Atmika. Now, the animals she lives with, she calls them Sangi, Sathi, companions, not pets. She also employs philosophical concepts in very unexpected, often semi-humorous contexts. One of these concepts is samskara, a concept that is impossible to translate in one word, samskara. She also combines Sanskrit words with local words, and she makes up these strange, oddly imaginative adjectives with everyday nouns. For example, udasin sa nilkant, or chakit sa kawa. Now that's sa. You can say a surprised crow. But chakit sa kawa, a somewhat surprised crow, seemingly surprised. It's very hard to translate the sa. This resonance of words, this suggestiveness of words in Indian poetics, it is called dhwani. What does dhwani mean? It means resonances, the resonance, the vibration of a word. And what is that vibration of a word? When you use a word, it echoes many earlier uses of the word in history and in culture. Take the phrase "yun hi kiya." Okay, now this phrase occurs in a lot of film songs. In this book on cinema, my book on cinema, I translated, for example, the song "Chalte Chalte Yun Hi Koi Mil Gaya Tha," and this is where I realized that this is untranslatable. How do you translate "yun hi"? Just like that, I met someone. Even chalte chalte is kind of untranslatable. On the way, on the road, it's not while walking, it is something else. I met someone in English, we often say it in Indian English, just like that somehow, but this does not translate it. So in other words, the reader, in Indian aesthetics, the reader is supposed to be sahriday with the author, of one heart, sharing a heart, sahriday, sharing the emotions of the writer in order to catch these resonances. Okay, take Mahadevi's sentence describing her peahen waiting for her dead mate. The peacock has died and the peahen is waiting. Radha is the peahen's name. Radha ab pratiksha mein hi dukeli hai. Now, the Sanskrit word pratiksha, waiting, combines with the untranslatable Hindi word dukela. Radha is now waiting two in one, sort of alone, but Dukeli means alone, but alone together. Now what does this mean? Obviously, the name Radha, it recalls Krishna's beloved Radha, who's left pining in the village after he goes to the city. And a less obvious suggestion in the word Dukeli is that Radha is ever united with Krishna, even though separated from him. Similarly, the peahen Radha is alone, but not alone, because she is united with her beloved, the peacock, in her heart. Um, what I'm saying from all these examples, one of the things is that common nouns, adjectives, verbs can be gendered in Hindi and in Sanskrit. The nouns can be, and in Sanskrit and in Hindi, and that is crucial because one cannot always translate this gendering into English. Keli, alone together, is feminine. You can't translate that into English. You'll just have to say alone together, and even that doesn't communicate it, right? So, all right, let me now come to poems. I'm translating poems in more detail and talking about pronouns. Pronouns play a very important part in poetry. Many love poems throughout history use the pronouns I and you, thus avoiding gender. But when we read these poems, due to our heterosexist bias, and I include myself in this, we assume when reading a poem or a song, we tend to assume that a man is addressing a woman or a woman is addressing a man. But many poets who wrote poems to the same sex beloved, they used this literary I-you convention to mask the gender of the poem when it was dangerous to write openly to a man. For example, here is Lord Byron, who was an aristocrat, very wealthy, but even he, with all his what we would call privilege, etc., he wrote love poems to both men and women. But when he wrote poems to men, he had to change the pronoun he to she in order to publish those poems. This is because in his time in the early 19th century in England, sex between men was punishable by death. So he used I or you to avoid mentioning the gender of the two lovers. Look how cleverly this is done to his first love, John Edelston. Ours too, the glance none saw beside. So ours. It could be any two people. The smile none else might understand, the whispered thought of hearts allied, the pressure of the thrilling hand. So you don't know. We know of course, now that it was Edelston. But at exactly this time in India, that is early 19th century, in Byron's time, in the early 19th century, poets were freely writing love poems about love between men, between women, and between men and women. Here's one of my favorite poets, Insha Allah Khan Insha. His pen name Insha means child, teasing the reader in a ghazal about kisses. So he starts off with withholding the beloved's gender by using you and I. Your cheek is made for kisses. Why shouldn't I ask for kisses? Kyo na kije sawal, bose ka. Bosa is kiss. Why should I not ask this question? When my mouth touched your lips, they turned red with kisses. So the my, I, and you. Locks falling over that face say we have woven a net of kisses. So he's avoiding the gender. But the next line, in the morning, your cheeks were blue due to last night's thoughts of kisses. Now that gives you an indication because the cheeks being blue, the image is of facial hair growing overnight. So it suggests that this is a man without stating it. It's not absolutely clear. But then in the fifth sher, he reveals the gender with the word Mia. Jaan nikle hai, oh Mia, de dal, aaj wada tal, bose ka. Oh mister, I'm dying, do give them to me. Today, give me your promised kisses. So when you use Mia, that cannot be a woman. It's what I've translated as mister. Yeah. So poems, poems like this, Urdu poems were always read first. They were recited aloud in gatherings before they were written down. And the audience had a lot of fun at these gatherings. So this teasing the reader with the listener with what is the gender of the person he's addressing is what is going on here. Let me take one more example. This is my book on Urdu poetry of this period, late 18th, early 19th century. And in this, I translated a lot of poems, Urdu poems, which had never been translated before. Here is the same poet, this poet, Insha, complimenting his best friend or his very close friend, Rangeen, Saadat Yar Khan, who was also an Urdu poet. And his pen name was Rangeen, meaning colorful. So Insha alludes to the pen name Rangeen in the word Ranginiya. Ajab Ranginiya baaton mein kuch hoti hai Insha. Baham ho baithte jab Saadat Yar Khan or Hum. It's a very rare verse in which the proper name of the other person is actually used, which is almost never done. So he used Saadat Yar Khan, so we know whom he's talking about. And then he plays with that word Rangeen, Ajab Ranginiya, strange colors or wonderful colors arise in our talk, oh Insha. Right? So, but you can translate it into English, wonderful colors. But the thing is that the dhwani, the resonance of the word Ranginiya is not conveyed by the word colors. Why? Because in Indian poetics, rang, it means colored literally, but it also means an emotion, a mood, a state of being. For example, when the poet Mirabai says that she is dyed in Krishna's color, rangai, that color has a mystical meaning. It refers to emotions and states of existence that you cannot pin down or describe, because you can't describe a color to somebody who is colorblind and has not seen, say, the color green or pink or red. You can't describe the color. It's the indescribable emotion, right? So that is what is going on here. And mystical poems are especially hard to translate. This is my book on the Sanskrit Epics and the influence of these epics on later literature. For instance, on 16th century princess who was a poet, a devotional poet, Mirabai. Now, if you look at this poem, it's called Tera Koi Na Kanhar. No one can stop you, Mira set out in ecstasy. Flinging away praise and blame, I took the narrow path of knowledge. The word is Jnana Gali. Tall the towers, red the windows, a formless bed is spread. Now, Nirgun is the word. Nirgun is, again, untranslatable. It doesn't, yeah, the literal meaning is formless, but it is, as you know, it has a mystical and philosophical meaning. The tray of remembrance in my hand, a beauty more true. Sumiran, literally remembrance. Again, it has a whole philosophical resonance, which I won't go into here. Second, when she talks about Nagari, she calls Krishna, let's see, Giridhar Nagar, and Radha is called Nagari. I want to talk about another poem to explain this. This is the famous first verse of Bihari Lal's collected poem Satsai. Bihari Lal was an 18th century poet, and this is his collection. Meri bhava badha haro, Radha Nagari soe, ja tan ki chhai pare, syamu harit duti hoye. Remove the distress, and now it's extremely hard to translate, and I'll just go into this a little bit. Radha is called Nagari. That's untranslatable. It means literally a resident of the city, someone who is sophisticated. But it's a very odd word for Radha, who's a rural woman. The term Nagarik appears in the 4th century Kama Sutra for a cosmopolitan male city dweller. Mirabai famously, of course, calls Krishna Giridhar Nagar. Krishna is an urbane, courtly city dweller. Now, Radha becomes urbane and courtly because of her association with Krishna, though she herself is a village woman. Also, of course, she's an incarnation of the goddess Lakshmi. So she is knowing, all knowing in herself. So I translated all knowing, which loses a lot. The second line is even more untranslatable. When the shadow of Radha's body falls on Krishna, he turns radiant green. But why? Now, we know this. You have to already have knowledge to know this. You can't explain it in the verse. Any reader would know that Radha is golden colored. Her complexion is gold. And Krishna, who is here called Shyam, the dark one, is blue colored. So you would understand that the mingling of yellow and blue produces green. This turning green, now in English, turning green has the resonance of becoming jealous. That's not the resonance in Hindi. In Hindi, green is the color of fertility, life, and joy. It's an entirely different meaning. One of Krishna's names is Hari, echoed in the word here, Harit Duti Hui, meaning the joyous and joy-giving one. So Harit, Duti, Harit also echoes with Haro, Bhava Badha Haro. Okay, so the joy of Krishna takes away or destroys the obstacles that existence presents, right? So the rasa of the verse, the rasa or the joy of the verse, the juice, the essence of the verse arises in part from these word choices. For example, the dialect word jhai, which means shadow, reflection, gleam, but also darkness, trickery, and echo. Radha, golden complexion, is also Maya, the illusionist goddess. As Maya, she echoes Krishna's darkness. So there's a play of light, darkness, and color in the couplet, and it produces this interfused union of the two. Krishna needs Radha in order to be Hari, the green one, the joy-giving one. Now, I explained all this to you in prose, but you can't reproduce the sort of pleasurable shock of compression in the original. And of course, you can't reproduce the alliteration and assonance in the original. The opposite is also true. Here's another poet in English, John Donne. Take me to you, imprison me, speaking to God in his religious sonnet. Take me to you, imprison me, for I, except you enthrall me, never shall be free, nor ever chaste, except you ravish me. To be enthralled to someone, enthrall is to be in their power. But the word enthrall, metaphorically, it means to enchant someone, to captivate someone, and to magnetize them through desire or love. But the word ravish, like the word rape, it literally means to kidnap and carry away someone. The soul must be seized and carried away by God, is what Donne is saying. But ravish also has the resonance of sexual rape. So by counterposing chase to ravish, Donne is producing this paradox, saying that the soul becomes pure when it is abducted or ravished or possessed by the divine. The puns and paradoxes and the sliding, look at the way the vowel slides. You enthrall me, you enthrall me, you, the ending vowel, the beginning vowel. It reproduces that experience of being irresistibly drawn. Now, this takes hold of the reader with an immediacy which is not reproducible in translation. So now, one reason why I object to to translations being taught in an English literature class along with original English poems is that if you're a student in an English class and you read Bihari in English translation, because you read this translation and then you read this original in English, you're almost certain to find Donne more memorable than Bihari. Even though Bihari is just as great a poet, it just the translation doesn't bring out that greatness. It doesn't bring out the power, the paradoxes, any of it. Because translations are nice to read, but when you're studying, if you study these two together, the translation can never measure up to the original. Okay, so moving from great things to small, let me come to my own poems. These are my two collection of poems. The first one written in the 1990s. Now, in the first one, Play of Light, almost all the love poems were written with first and second person pronouns, you and I, right? So when it was published, one of the reviewers, she expressed surprise, because I was known at the time for Manushi, and she expressed surprise that a feminist would write such adoring and submissive sounding poems to a man. So she assumed that I was writing to a man, because I and you, so you had no way of knowing the gender. And this is a good warning that one should never, when you're reading poetry from the past or even the present, we should never assume that the poem is from a man to a woman or a woman to a man. Let me read this one. Underskin glass loses brittleness, discovers its powers of waiting. Wards movement off, wounds only when touched, transparent to nothing but itself. Does it journey in blood, sink deeper in flesh, alien body, intimate friend, become a part of what it cut? Is it unbreakable, as is the heart? So the poem, any poem, depends on ambiguity. This poem uses the pronoun it to refer to a shard of glass, but also to the heart and to a state of being that both of them represent. To me, a poem is rarely a poem unless there is meter or at least rhythm of some kind. And I also enjoy rhyme or alliteration, both of them. Prose sentence, you just take prose sentences and then arbitrarily cut them up into shorter lines. That is not poetry to me. My next collection, this one was published in 2023. Some of the poems in it were written in the 90s, but not published until 2023. Now, here's a poem which experiments with internal rhyme and half rhyme. And so I'm just marking that to show you what would be very difficult to translate into any other language, into Hindi at least. So I've marked here the assonance in blue and the alliteration in yellow. The assonance in blue, and these are the kinds that you see I've marked the internal rhymes in green and yellow, and the assonance in blue. Yeah. So there's internal rhyme here, there's half rhyme here. Your birthday tomorrow, I must go sari shopping. Is it too late? Evening rain threatens. At the window, a black crinkly line spreads upward, fills my view. Black air, black sky, no, I can't go. Then suddenly blue again. I leave the tiny flat where we live, the four of us, in the post-train coolness, catch an empty bus. At a CP corner, two shops face each other, one is closing. Amid reds, mustards, magentas, I look for the pastels you like, saris draped over my lap. Cold. Is my mother alive? I think. Half awake. Calculate. Is it May? No, it's not. And now I'm chilled through. So these musical effects that I have marked here, they are almost always lost in translation. There have been some translations which retain the meter and rhyme scheme of the original. I'll give you an example in a little while. For example, Barbara Reynolds translated Ariosto's Italian epic poem Orlando Furioso, and it's really remarkable translation. She keeps the original rhyme and rhythm, meter. Speaking of Romance languages, here is the first three stanzas of a sestina that I recently wrote and published online in a poetry magazine. A sestina has six stanzas and a short seventh one. I love the challenge of the sestina. It's a form that was invented by a French poet in the 12th century. So the sestina encourages the poet to use the same word with different meanings or in a different idiomatic phrase. For example, the word time, had their time, passing the time, without rhyme or reason, right? So it requires you to draw on the resources of formal as well as colloquial English. There's also a bilingual pun in the title, by the way. Anand is a person with whom I'm conversing, but it also refers to conversing with Anand, with pleasure. Anand means pleasure or joy. Here's another example of a pun which would be untranslatable in the last line of this truncated sonnet. Extemporal, not born for death, they sing extemporal birds. Extemporal refers to speaking extempore, something unprepared, reciting extempore. But extemporal, it also alludes to being unprepared for separation during COVID. It comes from the Latin extempore, meaning outside time. And that refers to the idea of great poetry being immortal, outside time. And it alludes to Keats's line in his Ode to a Nightingale, where the nightingale is a symbol of the poet. And he says to her, "Thou wast not born for death, immortal bird." Okay. Sometimes a pun may not be one word, it may be a phrase. In this poem about a poet who died, and it's a sort of elegy for her. So at the end, I say, "No more poems for now, Archana, no more now and then." Now, that refers to conversations that happen now and then, that has happened sometimes, but are cut off by death. It also refers to how we talk to old friends about the present and the past, the now and the then. No more poems for now, Archana, no more now and then. In this poem written in the 90s, I continued to use the UI form as I did in my first collection. It's a love poem. But in this collection, I also use the third person pronoun she said, right? So there's no possibility of confusion. And there's a pun here on the word end in the title. So end as in finishing, it can only end in tears, she said. So that means finish in tears. But then in the last line, lost the writing, lost its way and found its end in you. End here means the aim or the goal. So after you read the poem, the pun in the title becomes clear. The only change I made for the publication of these old poems was removing the other person's name, which originally appeared in some of the poems. You can also avoid pronouns altogether by focusing on a metaphor, as in this quatrain. Looks ladylike but can make me gasp, ice on top and hot with sudden spice, gets there slowly, threatens pregnancy, teasing eyes, wicked over the glass rim. So you can avoid the pronoun by altogether by focusing on something else, on the metaphor. Okay, let me give an example from another more delicate kind of translation, which involves allusion. If you refer to a Hindi or a Sanskrit text, even in Bihari's poem, which I read, he's referring to the ideas of Radha and Krishna as green and golden and blue and golden and so on, green, golden, blue, etc. You have to know that. So similarly, if you refer to a Hindi or a Sanskrit text in an English language work, only certain readers will get it. Here's an example from my novel, A Slight Angle, which appeared from Penguin in 2024. It tells the intertwined stories of a group of young friends and relatives in 1920s in urban India. So this passage is about a young man, Abhik, who has run away from his love for another man, his student Sharad, and writes letters to him in his diary. And there are three allusions here to Sanskrit literature. I'll read it and you see if you can catch the allusions. I step into the neglected little garden that looks upward, thirsting for rain. Above the houses in front of ours, an elephantine cloud rears its head and swallows the sky, or rather the patch of sky that I can see from here. Trees shiver, embraced by the breeze, the ephemeral chill that precedes rain touches me. Rain falls lightly on you in Delhi's crowded alleys and imperceptibly on that sweeping watery plain where river merges into ocean. For now, let me wait out the rains and plan how to cross forests, leap oceans, gather my forces, and bring you home. If this home is real, it will stand in exile, in captivity, in desolation. If it is real, you will look up after months, years, decades, and pick me out from a row of many who look exactly like me, except that they have the immortal confidence and fearlessness I lack. You will look past their glamour and recognize me by these infirm eyes that cannot gaze at you unblinking. Anyone? You know what the allusions are? So I say these are why am I talking about this in the context of translation? Because we are translating here. When you have an allusion to another text, which is in Sanskrit or in Hindi, you are actually translating in a metaphorical sense. You are bringing that idea into an English text. So of course, the first allusion is to Meghaduta, Kalidas's Meghaduta, the cloud messenger. A man is separated from his wife, and it's in the rainy season. And in the poem, in Kalidas's poem, the poet sees a cloud, and it's like an elephant playfully butting a tree. So here in the novel too, it's rainy season, and he sees a cloud which is elephantine. And the next allusion is to the story of Nala and Damayanti, where several gods fall in love with Damayanti. So this is from the Mahabharata, and the gods take the form of her husband Nala to trick her. So she has to pick out Nala, her husband, from a row of men who look exactly like him. But how does she know which one is her husband? Because he's human, he blinks, and the gods are unblinking. The gods don't blink; their eyes are always open. So that was the reference in the last line. You will recognize me by these infirm eyes that cannot gaze at you, unblinking. Here's another allusion, this time to an English writer. So in this, Sharad in the classroom is looking at his teacher Abhik, and Abhik is teaching Peter. Yeah, and he's looking at Abhik, and Abhik's wide gray eyes seem to rest on mine. And then Sharad thinks iron gray as glass, not charcoal or blue gray or hazel that sometimes looks green gray, but true gray, like a pigeon's wing or a sultry cloud. Iron gray as glass, that's a quotation from Chaucer. Now, if you recognize it, you recognize it. If you don't, I guess it still works, but you know that this is a quotation from a medieval poem. It's not modern English. Okay, so my next translation, this will appear soon from HarperCollins, is a set of prose sketches by Mahadevi Verma. You may have read Gisa in school or one of her sketches. These are sketches mostly low-income people whom she knew through her life. She was a single woman and a very extraordinary woman. She traveled on her own, etc. She lived on her own, but with this whole household of people and animals, etc. And Mahadevi's own style can be quite Sanskritic, and I found it easy to translate that. But when she reproduces dialect, which her subjects are using, they use Banarsi Boli, Awadhi, a rural kind of Hindi, rural Khadi Boli, etc. It's very difficult. I can't translate that because in English, it flattens out all the differences that are there in Hindi. I can't turn the Hindi dialect into an English dialect. So you lose that differences in Hindi when you translate. Yeah. Okay, so finally, in the last poem in this collection, let me conclude with a couple of my translations from other languages into English of poetry. Now, this translation of the very famous "Wo jo hum mein tum mein karar tha, tumhe yaad ho ki na yaad ho, wo yani wada nibah ka, tumhe yaad ho ki na yaad ho." I'm quite pleased with this translation. What once there was between you and me, you may recall or not recall. That commitment to continuity, you may recall or not recall. So I'm pleased with it because I kept the rhyme scheme and the sort of plangent rhythms I kept the meter more or less. But take this, कभी हम में तुम में भी चाह थी, कभी हमसे तुमसे भी राह थी, कभी हम भी तुम भी थे आशना, तुम्हें याद हो कि ना याद हो. Once desire burnt between you and me, once a path led from you to me. Once we were lovers, you and me, you may recall or not recall. The word chah, it means both love and desire. You can't do that in English. So I resolved this problem by using desire in one verse, and another verse I use love for the same word. But you can't reproduce the sound, and that's more important. Tumhe yaad ho ki na yaad ho. It depends on that long yearning vowel in the word yaad. Recall has the same sort of long vowel, but because it has two syllables, recall, it doesn't have quite the same effect as chah. But it's better than the word remember, which is too long a word for the line. Okay, finally, let me close with the last poem in this collection. It's a translation of a famous song by the 15th century poet Raidas or Ravidas, who belonged to a so-called untouchable community of leather workers. I had to depart from the literal because the literal was not translatable. Ab kaise chute Ram naam rat lage. Now rat lagana, how can it leave me now? Ram's name. Rat lagana literally means to memorize. And that is treated to these days as a bad thing. I have to say that I love knowing poems by heart, and I love the phrase knowing by heart. I much prefer it to memorize. The poems that you know by heart are a resource that you carry with you everywhere. Ratalage here means Rama Nama Ratalage means Ram's name has become a habit of the tongue and of the heart. So I couldn't do it literally. So I translated as Ram's name in my heart and on my tongue. This Ratalagana, the Ram's name being always with you. This is a reference to the Gita, where Krishna tells Arjuna, "Remember me at all times." Why? Because you don't know the moment when you will die, especially when going into the battlefield, as Arjuna is. But existence itself is a battlefield. Therefore, the divine name should become such a habit that it's always on your tongue and always in your heart. So I extended Ramanama Ratalage to Ram's name in my heart and on my tongue. I lost the compression of the original. Ab kaise chute Ram Nama Rata Lage. I lost that compression, but I think I conveyed the emotion to some extent. Similarly, the wonderful string of metaphors here works only when the reader is familiar with their long cultural history. In Hindi, the chakor bird is inseparable from the moon. It's a partridge, but if you translate it to English as a partridge, that bird has no cultural resonance. So I made it moon bird, which gestures towards the connection, the cultural connection that the moon bird looks at the moon all the time. Moon bird gazing at the moon. Yeah. Similarly, pearl and thread. Now, you can translate, "You are the pearl, I'm the thread." But of course, it's a reference to a famous line in the Gita where Krishna says, "I am the thread on which all things are strung like pearls." This is what Raidas is doing here. The poet is doing is he is inverting the idea. Krishna says, "I am the thread on which all things are strung like pearls." Raidas inverts the idea and says the divine consciousness is the pearl and our consciousnesses are the thread that hold it or hold on to it. In English, this only works if you know the Gita and catch the allusion, I suppose, even in the original, only if you know the Gita will it work. Again, the phrase "Jaise sona chahe sohaga." Sohaga is literally borax, which is used to polish the gold, and so the gold becomes brighter. But it also carries in the original, borax just means borax and it makes the gold shine brighter. But suhaga, which means borax, also carries the submerged allusion to suhag, the word suhag, which means wedded bliss between the devotee and the deity. In English, you can't get that double meaning. Suhag, in any case, is untranslatable, marital bliss. And Tum Swami Hamadasa, again, "You are the master, I'm the slave." I kept it at that. A slave is slave, dasa is slave or servant. Now, in English, slave has only a negative meaning now. But being the dasa, the slave or servant of God, is what all devotees desire. Hence, regardless of their status in society, they added the word das to their names. You can take all these poets. Tulsidas was a Brahmin, Kabir Das, Rai Das, who, as I told you, belonged to a community considered untouchable, and Mirabai, who was a Kshatriya princess. They all called themselves Krishna's Dasa or Dasi, because to be the slave of God is the highest status possible. And this tradition, of course, continues in modern times with teachers like Ram Das who attach Das to their names. Okay, I'll stop there and I'll stop this sharing of the screen. Yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this wonderful.
So, any questions?
If anyone has a question, then you can also write in our chat box or directly ask to ma'am.
Yeah, I have a simple, just a short question. Can I just go forward? Yeah.
Sure.
Thank you so much for this wonderful talk. This is like really great. And so your work on same-sex love in India and classical Indian literature has, of course, revealed how translation choices around gender markers and pronouns can either preserve or erase queer possibilities in ancient texts. And given the fact that Sanskrit and other classical Indian languages often employ gender fluid grammatical structures, that the divine figures, for example, Ardhanareshwar, embody gender multiplicity, I was wondering, how do you navigate the tension between maintaining a linguistic authenticity and making these texts accessible to the contemporary readers? Like, what strategies do you employ to preserve these layers of meaning without imposing modern Western binary gender categories onto the text?
Oh, gender categories are binary even in the original. There's man and woman, there's boy and girl, there's, just the fact that there's bisexuality or that See, the thing about the divine is it's a mistake to think that what we're talking about is just gender being fluid. The divine is everything. When you read in the Mahabharata the praise of Shiva or the praise of Vishnu, long Vishnu Sahasranama, for example, or even Krishna's description in the Gita or the description of Krishna, Krishna is everything. Krishna is the god, he's a goddess, he's the feminine qualities, he's the masculine qualities, he's the mountains, he's the snakes, he's the elephants, he's the best of snakes, he's the best of rivers, he's the best of oceans, he's the fire. So it's a great mistake to restrict it to gender. It's nothing so narrow as that. Krishna is everything, Vishnu is everything, Shiva is everything. All right, and that cannot be applied to human beings. We are not everything. We are not a male and female and mountains and rivers and oceans and snakes and elephants, right? So you can't sort of make these equivalents of each other at all. And I hope that's not what I've been communicating ever in my writings. So that's one thing. The other is, how do I navigate translating from one language to another? I've tried to give you some examples of how to do that, and it cannot be fully done because English genders second person pronoun, third person pronoun, sorry. English genders she and he, but English doesn't gender I and you. But in the original, because the verbs are gendered, it's the I and you are gendered. When you say Meri Bhavbadha Haro, when you speak of yourself and the other person, but you use a verb. If you use a verb, then you are gendering yourself and the other person. Main karta hu, main karti hu, right? You are gendering. So both the languages, whether it's Sanskrit or Hindi or English or Urdu, they all have gender, just in different places, in different words. They're all gendered. Now you can avoid gender, as I showed you ways in my own poems of how you can avoid gender. To some extent, you can. And in the original too, many Hindi songs do this, as I have discussed in that several books, that they deliberately use formulations using the optative voice, for example, to avoid gender, so that in the I and you poem, it can be a love poem from anyone to anyone. And that happens in English too. I gave you the example of Byron, but there are many, many examples where because it is I and you make the poem universal. Anybody could be addressing anybody. And so the poems are doing this themselves, and it's just a question of how to if the poem originally is doing that, then how to keep that. What I was saying to you was the opposite in a way. What I was saying is that the Urdu poems were in the original using the feminine by referring to without stating it, by saying main chahti hu and meri zanakhi ki rangat pe jawana pir sone ki. So zanakhi is feminine and I am feminine. Wo zeb deti hai tasveer sone ki. So it makes it very clear that it's a woman speaking to a woman, which in English you can't do. When you say I and my girlfriend, the I, everybody will presume the I is a man. There's no way to convey that unless you put a separate title, a woman speaking to a woman, so I do that. That's not a great strategy, but that's the only strategy. There's no other way to, in English, to gender. You're talking about ungendering. I'm talking about gendering. I think it's important to give a gender to the speaker when its gender is there in the original. It's a woman speaking to a woman, but in the translation, I can't convey that without a separate title. So it looks like it could be a man speaking to a woman. That's the problem. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Subhanshu. From live, ma'am, some questions found. Ayush De is asking, in societies where poetic expression has often served as a site of coded dissent, to what extent can the aesthetic indulgence in puns and wordplay be considered politically irresponsible? Does the pursuit of pleasure in language risk neutralizing the urgency of historical pain embedded within that very language?
I'm afraid I'm not catching it. Do you have it in writing? Can we put it in the chat? So he's basically saying that it's frivolous to have aesthetic pleasure and we should all be political. Is that the idea of the question? Can you put it in the chat, or I couldn't understand what you were.
Okay, ma'am. Just 1 minute.
Or if that's difficult, read it again more slowly, louder and slower. Or go on with another question if there's another one.
Just 1 minute, ma'am. I am writing this question in chat box.
Anyone else in between? We are losing time here.
Ma'am, I wrote this message in chat
Okay.
box, ma'am.
All right, I'll read it. In societies where poetic expression has often served as a site of quoted dissent, to what extent can the aesthetic indulgence in puns and wordplay be considered politically irresponsible? Does the pursuit of pleasure in language risk neutralizing the urgency of historical pain embedded with that very language? Okay, you have a philosophy of poetry here, which I don't agree with. That's the basic point. So, in the present day, unfortunately, we are taught literature and poetry as if it is all about, it is only worthwhile. And this, I think, comes from the Victorians. I've written about this. It comes from the British period, I think, because it doesn't exist in earlier poetry, whether Urdu or Hindi or any Sanskrit. It comes from the Victorian period where we think that the only purpose of reading literature must be to make things better, to make the world better, or to educate ourselves, or to do something. If it doesn't do that, then it's a waste of time. Then we are just enjoying it. That's politically irresponsible, as you say, and not or socially irresponsible. And we should be always trying to, everything we do should be aimed towards making the world a better place. I can't explain to you how completely I disagree with this. I think great literature is the only reason to read it is for pleasure. The purpose of literature is pleasure. That's what Aristotle says. That's what Indian poetics say, and that's the literature that lasts. The literature that is pleasurable is what people pass on. That's the literature they copy, they learn by heart, and that's the literature that passes on. If you want to give a political speech, then do that. That's fine, but that's not a poem. There's a difference between a political essay and a novel. There's a difference between a political speech and a poem. If you want to give a political speech, then why write a poem? Give a political speech directly. A poem exists to give pleasure. It exists to be memorable and joyful. Now, in that process, it may be a happy poem, it may be a sad poem. A lot of love poems are sad poems. But what makes them a poem? If I write a sad love letter to someone, then that is conveying pain. But if I turn it into a poem, the pain, and this is what tragedy is, tragic drama like King Lear or Hamlet or whatever, you turn the pain into pleasure. The reader or the viewer of the play, of the poem or the play feels the pain of the character in the poem or the play, but it's not like feeling the pain of your sister, right? It's not actual pain. You know that it is in a work of literature. And once it has become a work of literature, you know this is not real pain in the pain in sense in which somebody dies and you feel pain. It's not that it gives you that pain transmuted into pleasure, heightened through the heightened and intense language of the beauty of the language, any language. That's what literature is, all literature, not just poetry. That's what all literature is. Anything else, if you try to turn a political speech into a poem, that's fine, you can do it. I can't think of any great work of literature that does that. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Another question is from Rakhi Mondal. I am also writing this in chat box.
It's okay, read it. Okay. Can the prioritization of pleasure in poetry be seen as a form of escapism, one that aestheticizes suffering, distances the reader from lived realities, and sanitizes the radical potential of literature? In celebrating pleasure, are we sometimes evading responsibility? Look, these kinds of questions, can it be seen as a form of escapism? Of course, anything can be seen as anything. I can look at the sky and see it as green, which many people might. I can see anything as anything, but that's not what I'm doing. So I don't see it as a form of escapism. You can, sure. In celebrating pleasure, are we sometimes evading responsibility? For what? What exactly? I mean, the reader distances the reader from lived realities. Then don't read. Nobody's forcing you to read poetry. Nobody's forcing you to read literature. Go and live in the lived reality. You want to. And I don't see them as contradictory at all. You can do both. You can we all live in lived reality, and you can work in that and do whatever. And you can also enjoy poetry or cinema or literature or whatever. Now, to say that everything has to be only about suffering and has to, and that there should be no aesthetic beauty in it and should all be about, and otherwise we are sanitizing the radical potential of literature. Not all literature has a radical potential. I don't know what you mean by radical. There's also a literature that you wouldn't consider radical, like, say, Keats's sonnet on first reading Chapman's Homer, or Bihari Lal's verse that I read to you about Radha turning Krishna green. I don't know what the radical potential of this is. You can find out some, I'm sure. But as I said, I can't make you read in a certain way, and you can't make me read in a certain way. You can't make everybody read literature as radical. Most people don't read it like that. Most people have never read it like that. So if you want to read all literature as radical, then sure, go ahead. That's not what I'm doing. That's not what this lecture is about. I think you're in the wrong place, or I'm in the wrong place. I don't know which.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you. And one last question from Shantan Sarkar.
Mm-hmm.
Just 1 second, ma'am. Yes, I write this.
Okay, Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak warns us against the romanticization of the native informant and critiques the textualization of the subaltern voice by dominant epistemes. In this context, when we indulge in the pleasures of punning and poetic devices, do we risk aestheticizing the silence of the subaltern? Can pleasure and poetry become a post-structuralist mask that makes the subaltern more readable but no more heard? Okay, first, I don't use critical theory. As you know, if you read anything written by me, I don't use critical theory. I don't agree with Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak at all. And so that's the first point. Again, all these questions seem to be saying the same thing in different in different language. They're all saying pleasure and poetry is a bad thing. It should all be about oppression, and all literature should be oppression and about pain and suffering. And when we celebrate pleasure or talk about puns or talk about the aesthetics of language, that's not what we should be doing. I realize that in many classrooms now, that's not done. You don't talk about aesthetics and form, and I think a lot is lost when you don't do that, because that's what the poet or the writer has been doing. I can't think of any great poet in any language who has not been punning, playing with words, and producing pleasure through that and enjoying himself or herself by doing that. And the readers haven't enjoyed it, whether it's Ghalib or Mir or Tulsidas or Shakespeare or anybody. So basically what you're saying is throw all this literature out of the window. And you're free to do that. I mean, you don't have to read these people. Throw them all out of the window. But fortunately or unfortunately, they're going to survive whether or not you happen to like them. If you don't like them, throw them out of the window and read some other kind of literature, or don't read literature at all, read something else, read political nonfiction or political fiction, or whatever. But the writers I'm talking about, this is what they are doing. And as I said, you can either read them or not read them or whatever. But that's what I'm doing, and I'm not doing the same thing as Spivak, and I don't want to do the same thing as Spivak. So there you are.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much for today's astonishing lecture. I will send the link. Someone asked, like, in chat box, that will this class be uploaded on YouTube? Obviously, you follow the YouTube channel.
Okay.
I will upload these videos some days after. And thank you so much, ma'am, for joining us. Thank you, ma'am.
Bye.
Thank you, ma'am. Good night.